And now I'm very excited to introduce our session now on transgressive art. We have a couple of student artists that are going to present their work, and we're going to flip the order that they appear in the program, and we're going to start with Lizzie Smith, who is currently studying photography at UVU. She specialized in creative portrait and self-portrait photography, and after Lizzie has presented, then I'll come up and introduce Kaylee. Lizzie.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lizzie, and like she said, I am a photography major here at UVU. And for the symposium, I wanted to do a self-portrait and combine it with a Dada poem. And Dadaism, or Dada poetry, is actually from World War I, and it was kind of an anti-war artwork period, and it's really cool because it's kind of redefining art and all that awesome stuff. So with this, I actually decided to write my own thoughts based around mental health, because that's something that's really important to me. And I find it kind of interesting how taboo mental health is here, especially here in Utah. Just trying to reach perfectionism and to always be perfect, and that's not always the case. So I wanted to write my own thoughts, and if you know what a Dada poem is, it's actually cutting up like a newspaper or something like that, articles, and shaking them around in a bag and then gluing them in the order that they shake out. And so with this, I wrote my own thoughts, and then I cut them out, and then I glued them to my body. And so I wanted to combine both these art forms of photography and Dada poetry and make it more personal. So about my thoughts, I really just wrote how I think that mental health is really important and we all deal with it, and how the people around me are affected by it, and how my family views it, and how I view it, and how important it is to take care of your health. And so with this, I wanted it to be like an anti-culture against mental health and how it's kind of taboo. And just like how in World War I, the war was what they were fighting against, and it didn't make sense to them. And just like mental health, it should make sense. And so with the process of this, I used my own camera, and I just set it up in my studio basement at my house. And after spending about 2 hours on my makeup and gluing them on my face in a random order, I just had fun playing around with lights. I wanted to use the color blue because blue is a very calming color, and it kind of goes along with depression and those feelings. Blue just kind of affects us psychologically like that. And I wanted to get a little bit creative with the makeup, and so I wanted to use sparkles to represent tears, and what they represent is kind of how society can try to cover up mental health, but at the same time, if you flip it, it could also represent how each of us are unique and how our differences make us beautiful, no matter how hard it is and what we're going through. So that is my project, and I will take any questions about it.
Testing.
Yeah, go for it.
I neglected to mention for the live stream audience, if you need to be signed into your YouTube account in order to have access to the chat. There's a prompt at the bottom right hand of your screen that helps you to do that. And please do if you'd like to ask any of the students questions.
Is this working? Great. I was wondering if you had any other photographers or other artists in general that gave kind of inspiration for this work outside of kind of the history of poems, I guess.
Yeah, one of my biggest inspirations for my self-portraiture is actually Brooke Shaden. She's a conceptual portrait artist, and she has really beautiful creative artworks, and she uses emotions and mental health in her work and just creates really beautiful and inspiring portraiture. So she's definitely one of my biggest inspirations for what I do.
What I want to know is what got you to write all those words? What kind of mindset were you in when you were writing those words in particular all over your
So I just decided to, when I was wondering what I wanted to put on my body, I was originally planning to just get like a newspaper article or something, but I wanted to make it more personal. So I was actually going through a bit of a rough time when I was thinking about this. So I decided to just write my own thoughts and write down what I was feeling in the moment. So this is what I wrote. I'm not going to read it out loud, but this is just what I did. And I enlarged some of the words that I thought were the most important, just to emphasize them and make them stand out a little bit more. But yeah, I just kind of wrote what I was feeling at the moment, and then I decided to put them on my body.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the, it's a lot more vulnerability than I could put in my art, so I appreciate it.
Thanks.
So I think you said that the placement of the words was random, but if you go back, I was just really struck by how to me it seemed strategic. So the word listen, that's right on your film, right on your lips, was that on purpose or was that?
No, it wasn't.
Okay, because that's just amazing, right? That it's right on top of the lips, and so to listen rather than to just be speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that answers my question, but I love it. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, the placement was random. I mainly focused on placing words that fit the spaces on my face, like to fill in the spaces, and some of them landed in kind of coincidental spots like that. But yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Our next student artist who's going to present is named Kaylee Otto. She's a self-taught artist and UVU student whose primary medium is digital artwork. Her unique artistic voice is evident in this piece. Kaylee.
Thank you. Like she said, I'm Kaylee. I am a lover of true crime and psychology, but I'm a web design major, and when the kind of prompt of transgression came out, I kind of looked at my own life. I was like, what kind of transgressional things do we have? Because their definition is pushing past the boundaries of normal. So what is something that in my life was pushing past the boundaries of normal? Well, I thought about gaslighting and abusive relationships. So I decided to visually represent what it's basically like to be gaslit. It's often considered not obvious. You think, I don't notice this. Every time like true crime podcasts or something like that always talks about it, it's like, oh, it was super subtle. They never noticed, but it's noticeable. We just choose to ignore it. For me personally, it was because I loved someone. And I ignored the things he said to me, and it still hurt. So a lot of these phrases are common phrases that are said by people who gaslight, like, it's just a joke. It didn't happen like that. I told you to do this. You're being over dramatic. it's not funny? Why are you always crying? Why are you always angry? Maybe there's things on here that you notice yourself, because I put a lot of phrases on there. But to push past this, we need to have our own filtration system, like a gas mask. We need to put in these boundaries of not accepting being gaslit, even if it's just in the workplace. I said to do this. No, you didn't. No, you did not. You didn't say that. If we allow that, we allow people to walk all over us. And eventually, we get hurt. And it's not really that fun to go through and accept something so dangerous and so toxic, which is kind of why I made it a comically bright green. If you're a Disney fan, especially of old Disney movies, you know every villain is associated with bright green smoke. You know, big, dramatic, bold. Absolutely, totally no, that's the villain. My favorite is Scar from Lion King, when he sings with the hyenas and everything is just green. Well, if you notice the green in your life, you'll notice that there's some of these phrases you're probably being influenced by. Maybe you're the one saying the phrases. And you know what? We all do it sometimes, Sometimes we push a joke too far and say, oh, it's just a joke. I didn't mean to make you cry. I know I do it sometimes. Jokes are funny. It's not funny when no one's laughing, though. Unless they're laughing with tears. Actually, that funny. But eventually, we all need to work on a filtration. I had to learn the hard way. Some people are like me who had to learn the hard way, who had to go through a hard and gross and mean experience to start standing up for themselves, to sit there and go, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to let you say that to me. That's not true. Many of these phrases are not just common, but some of them are specific to my own experiences, especially of, why are you so angry? Constantly being asked, why are you angry? I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with being constantly pushed, because that's what happens when you're gaslit. You're constantly being pushed into a reality that's not real. But it's still reality, isn't it? Only if we let it. There's a lot of inspirations from my own life in this, and a lot of life people around me that I notice in school, my friends, heck, even my own family. I have noticed it. Not them being gaslighters, but being gaslit. And it's kind of hard and it's scary. And I know a lot of people from the outside perspective goes and sit there and say, well, you loved them and I love you. So I ignored it. You're just making the problem worse, though. You're sitting there going, well, this isn't something we should accept, but I'm going to accept it anyway. So, yeah, that's pretty much it, Any questions?
I'm curious if you have any advice on how you can confront someone that is gaslighting in a way that isn't aggressive, maybe. I think that because it can be so aggressive and it
Oh, yeah, it's totally overlaps all the time. Even stuff in my own experience has been like just little things, maybe like someone, especially if you have like ADHD, you said it in your head, but you didn't say it out loud. Totally reminding them, just if you know the person's not going to be aggressive, but they're sitting there saying, well, I did tell you that, or, or it's a joke. And I was like, I found personally expressing, hey, that wasn't a joke to me, and that hurt, and being open and honest, because if they do actually care about you, they're gonna sit there and correct it. They're gonna be like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that. I think you're right. Okay, I want you to go do this. Or, I didn't realize that was so personal to you. So I won't joke about that with you anymore. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Obviously, you're a very talented graphic artist, and I wanted to know if you have plans to be a professional graphic artist, and how you might pursue that, if so.
I do want to pursue art, definitely, as a career. I'm personally going into web design because it's like the sciencey version of graphic design, just because I like hard work, apparently. But I do plan on doing more graphical art. I definitely plan on releasing a web comic eventually, which I would love to do, as well as just doing portraits for fun. So yeah, I definitely plan on doing more. To get into it, I just definitely say just jump into it, just do it. Post on social media. Post on, heck, TikTok's really big right now. That's all I post on, pretty much. Just, even if it's just your friends and family seeing it, you just start. I mean, eventually you can go to school and learn all the fun stuff, and that will definitely help as well. But yeah, definitely just jump into it. That's my biggest advice.
Okay, it's a pleasure of mine to introduce the next speaker, a former student and just really great scholar, Safrain. She's a junior in the humanities program with a minor in Latin American studies. This is the crazy part. She's a mother of 3, newly married, and works full-time while pursuing her love for art, Latin American studies, and Frida Kahlo, which I greatly admire. Safrain's educational goal is to learn how to bridge the gap between cultures, religion, and society. In her very little free time, she is usually with family, finding the next best coffee shop, or trying new restaurants. So welcome, Safrain. Oh, and her talk is The Transgressive Life and Art of Frida Kahlo.
We'll figure it out. Hello. I'm going to try to figure out how to get out of here. I'll let you do it. I don't want to touch anything. I'm not supposed to touch. You are fine. I'm Safrain. I'm Safrain Aguirre Walker now. That's a new last name I have to tack on there. I am going to talk about Frida Kahlo today. She's one of my favorite artists, and Christina and I got to bond over Frida Kahlo when I was in her class. Frida Kahlo's art could come off quite alarming, unsettling, or even frightening. But when we look into Frida's culture, her family, and her background, we see that instead, her art is a celebration of life. Throughout her life, we see just how transgressive it is. Frida lived on her own terms, blurring the lines of gender roles and pushing the femininity of her time through her fashion, keeping her monobrow grown out, often wearing men's suits, as well as having bisexual relationships. She spoke passionately about her political views and created art that could be deemed offensive with subjects like murder, death, and nudity. Her art celebrates death in a way many might find gruesome, and it forces the viewers to come to terms with their own mortality. We will look at some of Frida Kahlo's works throughout this presentation to see that throughout her transgressions, her pain, death, and life, her art reflects a perspective of death that helps people process, be comfortable with death, and see it as a part of life. This form of pain and transgression that Frida Kahlo experienced are attributes which are found in many, if not all, of her paintings. In Frida Kahlo's Thinking About Death, Girl with Death Mask, Henry Ford's Hospital, and many more that we'll see today, we watch an evolution of how she thought of death, her death anxiety as she continuously faced her mortality, as well as her coming to peace with the impending end to her chaotic existence. By observing Frida Kahlo in her tumultuous love life, her suffering through polio, a tragic car accident, and multiple miscarriages, we observe not only when and how she faced her mortality, but how she challenges her audience to also face theirs. You could say or assume that the Mexican people and their culture are obsessed with death. Octavio Paz explains this obsession with the dead in his book, The Labyrinth of Solitude, by saying, to the people of New York, Paris, or London, death is a word that is never pronounced because it burns the lips. The Mexican, however, frequents it, jokes about it, caresses it, sleeps with it, celebrates it. It is one of his favorite toys and most steadfast love. Of course, in his attitude, perhaps there is as much fear as there is in one of the others. At least he does not hide it. He confronts it, face to face, with patience, disdain, or irony. We see this passion for death among the Mexican people come alive during the festival of Dia de los Muertos. It is something that is so rich in their culture that it doesn't just start or stop on this one day. It is something that they experience all throughout their lives. Death and life are entangled and celebrated through their everyday, their traditions, rituals, and religion. As you can see, death is a common fascination to the Mexican people. It is not something they shy away from, but instead they celebrate it. Through her Mexican upbringing and the love she had for her culture, death was familiar to Frida Kahlo. Through her tumultuous and transgressive relationship with her husband, Diego Rivera, she experienced extreme highs and lows. Whether it was the exciting and lustful affairs they had, the passionate, violent fights, or the overall feeling of being less than or not good enough in her own skin. Kahlo often experienced a death within herself, a mental battle every day, to see this cycle as just another part of life and an overall struggle to embrace the seasons she lived through. Frida Kahlo was born in Mexico in 1907 into a family that she described as very, very sad. She felt as though her parents' marriage was loveless, and they were often very sick. Her father suffered from epilepsy, and shortly after her birth, her mother also became ill. Frida was then cared for by an indigenous wet nurse. As her mother neared middle age, she began to suffer episodes much like Frida's father's, with seizures and attacks. Her disconnection with Frida as an infant contributed to Frida's hostile relationship with her mother. She was clearly closer to her father, who was distant from all of her other siblings, and didn't take much time connecting with them, but often took Frida under his wing as he considered her the smartest of his children. They had many things in common, such as art, intellect, and sports. Frida perhaps took on the persona of the son that he always wanted and never had. It was early on in her life that she experienced the pain of war. And death, as her family was found in the crossfires of the Mexican Revolution. She wrote in her diary that, "I remember I was 4 years old," when actually she was 5, when the tragic 10 days took place. I witnessed with my own eyes Zapata's peasants battle against the Carrancistas. My situation was very clear. At a young age, Frida was faced with death and was exposed to her own mortality. Soon after these experiences, when Frida was just 6 years old, she was diagnosed with polio. She spent 9 months confined to her room. It was at this young age when Frida began to daydream and imagine wonderful things that she would later paint. She says herself again in her diary that she made a close friendship with an imaginary girl her age. She also made a world of imagination through a door she drew on a window. Due to her polio, she was left alone quite often in her room. She was paralytic, and her right leg became withered, shorter than the other and significantly weaker. When she was able to return to school, she was often made fun of. Lonely and like a wounded bird, she felt unwanted. This theme of loneliness is found often throughout her paintings. When depicted as a child, she is often set apart in solitude and is even alone in her family tree painting. In Frida's Four Inhabitants of Mexico in 1938, we see again a young Frida alone on the ground, watching nervously as the adult figures interact with the world. She looks to the pre-Columbian clay sculpture of a naked pregnant woman who is the symbol of both Mexico's Indian heritage and of the little girl's own future as a sexually mature woman. Like the adult, Frida the idol is broken. The front of its feet is missing, and its head has been broken off and repaired. Frida's ongoing ties to death could be largely attributed to her disdain about the future. From being bullied as an outcast, she fears her loneliness will follow her throughout her life, and it forces her to face her own death anxiety. Years later, in September of 1925, when Frida was just 18 years old, she and her boyfriend Alejandro were on a bus. It collided with an electric streetcar, and the bus was destroyed. Pinned against the streetcar in a building, Frida was pierced by a handrail that her boyfriend and other passengers had to pull out of her in order to move her out of the bus. Her body was covered in blood and gold dust from a painter's belongings, and women around her shouted, "La ballerina," as she laid covered in gold blood. This horrific accident caused severe damage to Frida's body. Her spinal column was broken in 3 places, her collarbone was broken, 3rd and 4th ribs broken, her right leg had 11 fractures, and her right foot was dislocated and crushed. Her left shoulder was out of joint, her pelvis broken in 3 places, and her uterus punctured. The handrail entered her abdomen on the left side and came out through her vagina. For a month, Frida had to lay flat on her back in a plaster cast. At night, she was haunted by the thought that she might have died, the death as a memory of gold-speckled redness on naked flesh, of exclamations, "La ballerina." In this hospital, death dances around my bed at night. After 1925, Frida's life was never the same. She lived with extreme pain in her spine and right leg for the rest of her life. She was often fatigued, and there were times when she felt more or less well, but gradually her body disintegrated. She had over 32 surgical operations, most of them on her spine and right foot. Andreas Henestrosa is known for saying that Frida Kahlo lived dying. It is no surprise that during this time in her life, she came to a new understanding of her mortality, constantly facing the fact that she was falling apart and had to overcome something that she was much more difficult than we are to understand. At this time, anyone who spoke of Frida's accident was in awe of her survival and thought it was fate that she lived through and endured this pain. Frida herself came to share this feeling, that suffering and death is inevitable. Since we each carry the burden of our fate, we must try to make light of it. This thought and idea towards death was always looming in her art and approach to life. She was known for often making jokes about death. Death was her companion, and death had become part of her. She says herself, "I tease and laugh at death so that it won't get the better of me." She went on to paint her own death metaphorically, always having death looming in her life and art. Of all of Frida's paintings, the one that may speak to us the most of her state of mind, her feelings and emotions, about her sickness and her loneliness, may be the painting of The Broken Column from 1944. There's quite a bit of symbolism in this painting in regards to her emotions and how she sees herself, trapped and isolated. She is yet again in an apparatus as she was physically bound and cast throughout her life. She is seen naked and vulnerable with a cut in her torso from her neck down. The open body suggests surgery and her feeling that without the steel corset, she would literally fall apart. Inside the open body, we see a cracked column in place of her own spine. To Frida, this represents the rod that pierced her vagina during her accident. In her diary, it is written, "To hope with anguish retained, the broken column, and the immense look without walking in the vast path, moving my life created of steel." The buckles of her corset accentuate the vulnerability of Frida and her nakedness. Her hips are covered in a cloth suggestive of Christ's sheet. She's displaying her wounds like a Christian martyr, and she uses her pain, nakedness, and sexuality to bring the message which exemplifies her transgressive mindset, exposing herself and outwardly mocking religion. She's not looking to the heavens. Instead, she is staring straight ahead, begging her audience to see her for who she is and the pain that she's lived in. Not only see her body failing her, but to face their own mortality in the picture of her body decaying without her consent. She is challenging us to accept our bodies will also fail us. To convey the loneliness and emotional suffering, Frida has yet again painted herself alone and isolated, without any comfort. She's in a harsh land with a barren landscape, which is a metaphor for her broken body, like the desert deprived of life. In 1929, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo married. Diego Rivera was already a well-known muralist throughout Mexico and known for his political views as a communist. His activism in the Mexican Communist Party convinced Frida to join the socialist movement and speak up on behalf of their political views. As a successful painter, he also mentored Frida and helped her find her own style and voice through much trial and error. He encouraged her to find her own expression through portraits and the surreal nature of her work. Throughout their relationship, they entertained many guests in their home, including artists, journalists, and photographers. Political meetings were held along with parties celebrating their wins and artistic expressions. In 1932, Diego and Frida were living in Detroit. While Diego worked, Frida assisted while they attempted to have a child. In 1932, Frida also suffered 2 miscarriages that she painted about in Henry Ford's Hospital and Frida and the Miscarriage. Not only are these paintings transgressive for its time, depicting Frida yet again naked and lying in blood, but it's also transgressive for our time. Frida Kahlo is freely talking and painting about a miscarriage, which today is still a taboo topic. She's vulnerable and graphic in this painting, exhibiting her physical state. Lying naked in a bed with blood hemorrhaging. Her body is twisted to show her discomfort and need for help. There are 6 objects flying above her, all connected to her through an umbilical cord. One is a male fetus, which is the son her and Diego longed for. Another is a snail that represents the slow process of losing the baby and the surgeries that she's had. There's a pink orthopedic cast of the pelvic zone on the left, which alludes to the fractures of Frida's spinal column. Below, there's a machine to represent Detroit, where she had the miscarriage, and in the middle is an orchid, which was given to her by Diego. It's also in the same shape as the illustrated fetus. And finally, on the bottom right is a pelvic bone. Tears are pouring out of her eyes, and she's left alone again in this moment, grieving and mourning her unborn child as she ponders her mortality and the life that is so easily lost. The shock of the miscarriage and the realization that Frida was never going to be able to have children made her contemplate her own life as she was overcome with grief. In Frida and the Miscarriage, it portrays Frida standing naked with tears running down her face. There is a fetus in her womb, and connected to the umbilical cord beside her is a second, larger fetus. Blood is pouring down her leg from her vagina and into the ground, watering and nourishing plants that grow into parts of a fetus. You see child's eyes, hands, and genitalia growing out of the ground. The moon in the sky also weeps, staring down at Frida, who is holding a painter's palette in her hand, symbolizing that painting is a refuge from the death surrounding her, following her, and engulfing her. She's known for saying, "My paintings carry within a message of pain. Painting completed my life. I lost 3 children, and painting replaced all of that." Through the mourning, grief, and hostility it created in their marriage, Frida and Diego began to struggle to stay faithful to one another, as Frida often experimented with bisexuality. Many affairs occurred, and aggression grew between them. Frida turned to drug abuse and alcoholism as their marriage became more and more tumultuous. In 1933, Frida and Diego would return to Mexico. Frida would then paint her next piece of art, A Few Small Nips. This piece is based on a news article about a girl being murdered by her boyfriend. Frida tells her friend she painted the murderer as he appears because in Mexico, killing is quite satisfactory and natural. She felt a sympathy with the murdered woman since she herself had come so close to being murdered by life. Within a few months of the Rivera's return to Mexico, Frida felt as though her existence had been extinguished when she discovered Diego had fallen in love with her sister, Cristina. This piece of art is not depicting her own experience, but her suffering projected onto another woman, as another example of her mortality being exposed to the public yet again. In 1935, Frida left Diego and moved into her own apartment. This would be the first of many times they separated. This separation fueled one of Frida's many affairs with friend and communist revolutionary Leon Trotsky. Kahlo and Trotsky first met in 1937, when the painter was 29 and the politician was 57. Frida and Diego were vocal supporters of Marxism and had been members of the Mexican Communist Party for a decade. Kahlo and Rivera offered Trotsky and his wife their second home, known now as the famed Casa Azul. It wasn't long after the Russian couple settled in that a romance developed between Kahlo and Trotsky. They would meet secretly, and he would slip love notes into books that he lent her. But it didn't take long for his wife to catch on to their affair and give Trotsky an ultimatum. At this time, Frida was growing tired of the affair and ended things, and this was her parting gift to him, a self-portrait. In 1938, Frida would paint Girl with Death Mask, She Plays Alone. In this painting, we see what could be portrayed as Frida Kahlo herself at a young age. Knowing that Frida mostly painted her portraits of herself and only what she knew, we are left to assume that this is in fact her, or her perspective of herself. She paints this little girl to be somewhat unapproachable, or with a sense of ugliness in her stocky arms and legs, attempting to be covered by a delicate coral dress with lace to soften her approach. She's painted in front of a harsh, jagged mountain and attempted soft-spoken sky, yet she is still covered in an ugly death mask. We assume it's her prophecy of the harsh reality that death is in and around her life, as well as her impending future. The girl is wearing a traditional death mask that you would see worn in a parade on Dia de los Muertos. She is holding a marigold flower, which is used to honor the dead and put on their graves. This flower is believed to represent the fragility of life. The girl is also accompanied by a tiger's mask of some sort that was similar to one Frida Kahlo had in her living room. It is used as a talisman to protect the child from evil. This talisman could be a representation of a spirit guiding and protecting Frida Kahlo's lost child, or even one that she keeps to herself to ward off evil spirits and hopes it guides her into peaceful death. The subtitle of this painting is She Plays Alone. This could allude to the fact that Frida, again, is alone, as she often was bedridden for quite some time throughout her life. She is known for saying, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the person I know best." The Dream Bed. In this painting, Frida is fully expressing her feelings with death, as death creeps atop her bed, characterized by a skeleton armed with dynamite, ready to blow at any moment. He watches over a sleeping, peaceful, and comforted Frida as he lays awake, watching and waiting. Frida once joked with her husband that the skeleton was an amusing reminder of one's mortality. Our impending death is always around the corner, prepared for us at any moment. Thinking about death. Throughout Frida's life, she suffered from the above-mentioned numerous illnesses, her self-doubt, loneliness, and marital struggles, as well as miscarriages and drug abuse. Her life was tumultuous, complicated, and full of death, transgression, sadness, and the constant reminder of her mortality. This self-portrait was painted in 1943. Her health was deteriorating at a rapid pace. She was bedridden during most of this time. Her health condition again made her come face-to-face with the skeleton atop her bed, lying in wait to snatch her life in the night. Death is symbolized here as a skull and crossbones, which shows up on her forehead. She isn't afraid. She isn't mourning her death to come. Instead, she has embraced it, as she has so many times before. In her culture, death is a symbol of rebirth and life, and this portrait is almost a comforting reminder. The background is lush and green to represent a life without pain, a life worth living, as it's just another step in our inevitable death-ridden life. Throughout these paintings by Frida Kahlo, we don't see a theme of fear or anger, resentment, or death being perceived as scary for Frida. Perhaps what ultimately makes her transgressive is that she embraces the fact that it's in her future to face death as the next phase of her life. It is a part of the cycle she must accept, and she rejoices in it. We see how hopeful she is for the next phase in the cycle of life, by how she celebrates her every day. Through the pain, the heartache, the ups and downs, she is determined to live life to the fullest. She was a political activist, a lover of many, and an artist with a point of view. She was an independent, boundary-pushing voice for women, and we see her transgressive life through her art. Because of her upbringing in Mexican culture and her obsession with death, there was a beauty and comfort in knowing she wouldn't be forgotten. She believed she would live on joyfully after death, perhaps by visiting every year on Dia de los Muertos. Her art would be her legacy, and her dance with death would soon become the next phase of her life. It may be difficult to see the beauty in these paintings, or in any painting celebrating death, but when you see death as a part of life and time to rejoice, remember your loved ones and celebrate. You might see there is joy in death, there is beauty in the marigolds, and laughter in celebrating the life that is, the life that was, and the next phase of life to come. Thank you. We don't need to take questions. We can slink away. Okay, Kim.
Mic check. I don't know. I think it's a signal thing, so could you ask it over here, please? Mic check.
She'll forget it by then.
Hello, hello. Okay. One of the texts that we read in that class is called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. And it's a really famous work about how we deny death. And it seems like, and in that book he makes the point about how our denial of death is an engine for a lot of the things that we create and have created in civilization. And it seems like Frida Kahlo was just not granted that luxury. She was, just because of her life just was, she suffered so much tragedy that she was never allowed the luxury of denying her death. It was always right in her face, and that also seems equally productive for her. This is not a question yet. You mentioned that her work is, I think her work is so beautiful. It's so colorful. There's not a lot of black in it. There's, it's violent. It's violent and it's gory and it's terrifying, but it's beautiful at the same time, all those colors. And I don't have a question. Maybe this is just an expression of appreciation.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in class all over again. Just tell me how great I did and we're good.
Perhaps you already answered this, but what makes you so interested in Frida's work, and what do you think you take away from her work in her life?
What makes me so interested in her work? Actually, it was a Humanities Symposium a couple years ago. They asked who your favorite art or your favorite art piece, and I love art, and I couldn't nail it down. And so I sent a few to Kim, and I said, you might not want to use Henry Ford's Hospital because it's gory, so you can use something else. And I sent her a few other ones, and she said, no, we're going to use that one. And what I get from it is I can relate to a lot of her life without all the death. Henry Ford's Hospital was the one about a miscarriage, and I have suffered miscarriages, and it really, what I appreciate about it is that not only was she willing to speak out about it at that time, but you don't see a lot of people speaking out about it now. And I liked how detailed and gory or how vulnerable it is. You don't talk about it because you don't want to know about it. You know, I think even now, oh, she had a miscarriage, and you know, you don't say anything because it's gonna trigger or whatever. And I like that it was just in your face, and this is what it's like, and now you have to look at it. And I feel that way with a lot of her art. It's very vulnerable and intimate, and I can relate to parts of her life that speak to me, that maybe things that I don't want to say out loud, she says it for me.
I have to ask you something. Can you go back to the slide of the two miscarriage images?
Yes, I got it. Maybe not. I can't find it. All right, I'm gonna let you do it. I can't do it. And can I just click back? Oh, yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so with the one on the right, I was so struck by this extra arm and the painter's palette, and I was wondering if you wanted to say more about that.
I don't know, Christina, what should I say?
Well, I don't want to, yeah, just what do you think about the fact that she's depicted herself after this miscarriage, but she's also depicted herself as an artist. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on how she views herself as a woman and an artist, and I think this question is turning in more to a statement. But I wanted to discuss it with you, right? This idea of her body as a kind of figurative palette and the pain that she's been through. And anything you want to add to that?
I would actually take it a little different. I would see maybe the duality of it. I know she struggled really hard with being submissive to her husband and also her own person. And since he was a painter at that time, kind of like outshined her. And she was kind of nobody for a while. And so I would look at that and maybe feel like this is a part of her she's breaking off into, but she's still trying to be a mother, and she's still trying to be soft and sensitive. And I didn't put any up there, but there's paintings that she's made of her and Diego, and she makes herself like significantly smaller than him. It makes him look like giant and monstrous, and she's really tiny. And it's because she's trying to force herself into this wife mold that she's just not made for. And so I think that's how I would see it, of maybe because I feel like I've been in a position where I've had to sacrifice my art for a relationship, and I would like, and because I relate to her in many ways, maybe that's something she's also feeling. I have to sacrifice art for a baby, or if I wasn't having this miscarriage, I could be painting something, you know. But I like your point too.
So with these two pieces in particular, I noticed that Frida's kind of use of body proportions is very, it's like almost like a textbook. Like it seems like something that you find in like a alternate textbook. Kind of reminds me of like the Codex Seraphonus. Like what do you think? What do you think possessed her to make things look so like alien by making them look like almost too realistic? Anatomically off.
Well, so like I just said, like she makes herself very small. So I think like in this one in particular, it is meant to be distorted. She's in pain and she's hemorrhaging blood, you know, like, so it is, she's twisted and she's uncomfortable. The other one, I think what you're trying to say is like a medical textbook, right? She's very proportionate. I think it's detail of what's going on in her body. She's showing that there's blood coming out and where it's coming from and why it's coming from there. Like she's a surrealist. She wants you to use your imagination, but also look at her reality. You know, like you can kind of paint your own story about what's going on, but this is in your face, my reality. Does that make sense? I don't know her mindset of why she made herself so small all the time or kind of alien-like you're saying, but all of her paintings of herself are very realistic. Like, we know what she looks like based, you know, you don't even have to see a picture of her. You can just see a painting, and that's what she looks like. She's very honest with how she looks, which is, her paintings have, like, unibrows and a little bit of a mustache. That's just how she was. She wasn't trying to cover it up.
Thank you.
Third time's the charm.
So, what made you fall in love with her story?
Like I said, like I feel like I do relate to her a little bit. I'm not as Mexican as her. My dad's face right now. I don't know. I like that she was out of the box and in your face and very outspoken, and I find myself to be that way. I'm very blunt and honest, and I have no problem speaking my mind, and she just had a different way of doing it, you know, and I appreciate that. I'm not as good of a painter as her, so I think that she paints a lot of my feelings and paints a lot of my words and my thoughts that I maybe feel insecure to say or that I would be judged to say. I can just kind of be like, she said it, you know, she said enough for the both of us. And that's kind of what I like about her. She's unconventional. Okay.